One of the biggest assets of Hunter x Hunter, and one of the story's most striking attributes, is its unpredictability. Look up virtually any review of the manga or anime, and the chances are, the reviewer will bring up Hunter x Hunter's impressive ability to continuously keep the audience guessing, by expanding the story focus, shifting the tone, and peeling back more layers of the mechanics of its world. Togashi has crafted a story which has a knack for constantly remaining fresh by broadening its horizons and scope. There are no set structural rules when it comes to this narrative, but in general the stakes continuously raise, and the story gets grander and darker as the series goes on. Doing this is easier said than done, however. A constant expanding of what is possible in any story must be done very carefully, or else there could be a very real feeling that the writer is making up things as they go along. There are no shortcuts. A sizable portion of the story must be devoted to developing relationships, establishing a tone shift, introducing the rules and intricacies of certain story mechanics, and building a world. The easiest way to do most of this, of course, is through exposition and info dumps. Sadly, these come with the obvious problems, so if a writer wants to establish structural groundwork in a story well, they face the tricky task of organically weaving the setup of a story with the narrative of the story. This can be difficult because in going with this approach, the writer runs the risk of not fully expanding on or executing their mechanics, and sometimes mixing developing relationships, exposition, and shifting tones with an ongoing plot can lead to a very stop-start feel in a story, in which plot events will pause so that elements can be explained or established, and then start up again. This can be very turbulent and frustrating to watch, and at times can actually be a worse approach than a simple info dump due to this. But Hunter x Hunter somehow manages to avoid these pitfalls, and constantly expand its reach in basically every conceivable way, yet it never seems boring. And while I do believe that every arc has its role and contributes to the story, there is one story arc that I believe to be one of the most, if not the most important, in all of Hunter x Hunter for establishing everything that I just talked about, yet one that is pretty damn underrated in terms of the perception of what it achieves. Heaven's Arena. Now, before you start moving your mouse to the dislike button and closing the tab, hear me out. I'm not saying that Heaven's Arena is the best arc, or the most thrilling arc, or the deepest arc, or even my favorite arc. In case you're curious, Heaven's Arena actually sits in 4th place on my list. But I do personally believe that it's the most important arc in terms of function. Heaven's Arena was the ideal transitional arc for Hunter x Hunter, and due to its design, it molded the skeleton for the entire identity of the series. Before I get into why I believe this to be true, let me explain why I don't believe most of the other arcs to be as significant in mechanical function. Dark Continent has only just started, so I'm obviously going to skip that one. The Election arc is actually pretty underrated in terms of how many new elements it establishes, and it itself is a good transitional arc, while being emotional and entertaining, but too little of the story has passed since it ended for us to truly get a grasp of its impact, and so much of the story had been established before it. Maybe in the future I'll be able to look back at the Election arc retrospectively and marvel at its significance, but not quite yet. The Chimera Ant arc is special, and the arc that had the deepest impact on me. It's easily one of my top 2 arcs in the series, and one of my favorite arcs ever, being really emotionally resonant and thematically rich. But despite its length and beauty, it was an arc that could really only be executed within the confines of this specific story because of the foundations that had been laid before. Not only this, but it undoubtedly has a very self-contained nature to it, quite separated from the rest of the series in a number of areas, for better or for worse, and does not really have as big of a structural domino effect compared to some of the other arcs. So that's why I don't think that it's the most important in terms of function, but it is truly appreciated by the fanbase, and it's definitely the most important arc in other ways. Greed Island was very unique and enjoyable, and you could definitely make a case for it being the most underrated arc, but I don't think I really need to get into why it wasn't the most significant arc in the series. York New was vital, especially in introducing the themes of moral ambiguity, but other than that, and just like the Chimera Ant arc, it concerned itself with the execution of the setup, rather than building too many foundations, and it owes a great deal of its success to the arcs that came before it in many ways. The Zoldyck family arc was very important for Killua, but it was hardly even an arc, really. Now, I know some of you may be thinking that the Hunter exam is the most significant and underrated arc, for introducing our characters and world, and displaying relationship dynamics, characterization, and conflicts. And while I do agree with this notion in theory, because of the circumstances behind Hunter x Hunter's success, I still think that Heaven's Arena is slightly more important with what it does. In any standard story, the opening arc tends to be the most important, because of how it sets up the vast majority of, well, everything. But the thing is, Hunter x Hunter is not a standard story. Part of what makes it special is how it constantly switches things up in terms of story approach and tone, and continuously ramps up its domain. And since this is a specialized aspect of Hunter x Hunter, I think that Heaven's Arena's function is more important for the overall series structure than the Hunter exam, because it is the arc that properly establishes the elements that make the series stand out from the crowd. Plenty of anime have brilliant establishing arcs, but not too many have great transitional arcs. And that's where my justification comes from. By and large, I think that this arc is relatively underappreciated for how much it accomplishes and sets up in such a clean and engaging way. The sprawling and wonderful later arcs of Hunter x Hunter are beautiful, but without the foundation established in Heaven's Arena, the tone shift would be jarring, the mechanics would not have been properly explained, and the whole thing would have fallen flat. While York New is justifiably known as the point where Hunter x Hunter really begins tackling some dark ideas and gritty atmosphere, the basis for this tone shift was created by Heaven's Arena. And while it is true that after this arc, Gon and Killua stopped off at Whale Island in a little segment that was far from dark, I consider that part of the story to be a pit stop, needed to build certain aspects of the two's relationship, to tap into Killua's existentialist nature, and to pivot Gon's specific motivations to lead them into Greed Island and York New. It was like a little bit of a calm before the storm sort of thing, and it was relatively light, but I think that it was an exception to the tone of the series at this point, which had already been altered to an atmosphere far darker than we had had in the story up until now. For a tone shift to be done properly, it can't be jarring. Several stories I've experienced, and even some that I really liked, have minuscule tonal inconsistencies, where a very serious or sad scene is followed abruptly by a stupid joke or an inexplicable lighthearted moment, which completely ruins immersion with its abrupt nature. More to the point, other stories have this problem on a larger scale, where an arc takes an atmospheric turn that seems dissonant with what should be happening in the story due to an improper transition. Examples of stories I've seen with this problem would be Akame ga Kill and Re:Zero. What I find interesting is that Hunter x Hunter, which is a series that encapsulates the concept of tone shifts, has very few of these problems. When people describe their experiences with how Hunter x Hunter turns into a darker story, they usually say something along the lines of, "I didn't realize how dark the story was getting until it had gotten there," which is the sign of this aspect of storytelling done very well. An almost subconscious tonal alteration occurs in this series, never feeling out of place but always feeling stark and fresh. This slow change is illustrated well in the opening episodes of the Chimera Ant arc, but even more prominently in Heaven's Arena due to it being the first instance. Through Heaven's Arena, Hunter x Hunter takes the gradual approach to tone shifts, sprinkling bits of darkness throughout the arc that grow in influence as the story goes on. The arc starts off no darker than what had come before it, and probably lighter than some moments in the mini Zoldyck family arc. But as it goes on, it becomes punctuated by little moments here and there that lay the groundwork for the darkness to come, bringing forth a more sinister nature without it being too overbearing. This is done so that the York New arc can strike with all its might, yet not feel too out of place. These little moments I talk about here are very subtle, but there is an undeniable air of foreboding around them. I'm talking about things like the tense air in the build-up to some of the serious fights in the arc, but more primarily, I'm talking about the scenes with Kurapika trying to ply his trade as a hunter in a dingy underground market and then learning about Nen, or Machi's introduction, foreshadowing the Phantom Troop's inevitable actions, or the scenes lingering on Hisoka, and both the existence and removal of his tattoo. These moments had an oppressive or malevolent feel to them, not only due to the darker thematic context, but thanks also to a gloomier aesthetic design with either a muted or darker color palette in the 2011 anime. It's also worth noting little quirks in the visuals that add an ominous or bleak tinge to the feel of the arc, like the imagery of a lone person traversing the streets of a dark city at night, or the way the raindrops on Kurapika's face looked remarkably like tears. The audio design for the 2011 anime was terrific in this aspect as well. For Kurapika's scenes, there was a notable silence except for the pouring of the rain, giving a somber feeling of isolation. And the supplementation of the unsettling Phantom Troop theme in the Hisoka Machi scene was striking, especially given this was the first time that the song had been used, and by far the darkest song of the series up until that point. Scenes like this were used sparingly but intelligently, inserting a new and sinister feel into the series that ever so slightly changes the audience's perception of where the story is headed in terms of tone. The 1999 anime was a bit different when it comes to tone, but that's for a future video. The point that I'm trying to make here is that the later York New and Chimera Ant arcs executed their dark themes, but Heaven's Arena established them through smooth transition into a brooding atmosphere achieved through visuals, audio, and a combination of many little touches that led to a foreboding feel throughout. I'm far from an expert when it comes to combat systems in shonen, but I have no problem believing anyone who says that Nen is among the deepest and most intricate types of battle mechanics in anime history, which is quite a common opinion. Nen is the cornerstone of every single arc past the introductory period of the series, and with good reason. It's a battle system that is so free in its nuance, and the sheer number of ways that it can manifest means that nearly limitless types of battles can occur, allowing Togashi to flex his creative muscles. Aside from this, Nen has a deeper narrative purpose as well. Many important character moments are based around characters training their Nen, or reacting to a dramatic circumstance completely formed from a unique Nen power. Events like the heartbreaking switch off of APR from Knuckle in the battle with Yuppie, or Kurapika's Judgment Chain come to mind. A Nen power also tends to take inspiration from the personality of the fighter, such as Gon's childish rock-paper-scissors technique, Silva's explosive orbs, or Hisoka's playful bungee gum, which has the properties of... never mind. The point is, Nen is a truly creative and dynamic way of characterizing, creating thrilling fights, as well as laying the foundations for important story beats, and Hunter x Hunter would not be nearly the same without it. Due to its significance, however, introducing Nen into the story was always going to be a very difficult and delicate task. Just as he was with the tone shift, Togashi really needed to be deliberate with his introduction of Nen into the story in Heaven's Arena. As you'd think, a front-loading of the Nen mechanics would be an overload of expositional inefficiency, and not focusing enough on the rules would not provide a solid enough system to base fights around without feeling inconsiderate. But again, I'm of the opinion that Heaven's Arena's approach is very good. Now, nothing is totally perfect, and I suppose that in explaining the broad rules of Nen, Wing's speech got a little bit exposition heavy. But in fairness, I'm not exactly sure how else a writer could have approached that. It fell in line with the needs of our protagonists in the plot at this time, and covered just enough so that it was established as a deep and complex system with a big learning curve, but simple enough for our heroes, and the audience, to grasp it. Gon and Killua initially make a giant leap, so much so that the audience finds it gratifying that they're adapting so quickly. This leap in ability here was basically the sweet spot, so that our heroes were displayed as powerful prodigies, yet just enough was left out so that there was plenty of room for them to learn and grow after the initial teaching, and so that the audience didn't get the full picture. This is great from a narrative standpoint because it sets the story up so that it makes it possible for our heroes to fail, which I find to be a great thing in stories so long as development stems from the failure. And it's also great for the communication of Nen mechanics. After the main ideas are communicated here, the audience has learned most of what they need to know, but this allows for the finer details to gradually begin to be filled in as the episodes go by in this arc. Through Hisoka's discussion with Machi explaining how he defeated Castro, we get to see the sheer scope of how far Nen can be pushed. Through the cutscenes with Kurapika, we learn more about Nen rules and restrictions, and through some of the fights, we immediately see the different ways in which Nen can be harnessed. If you think of Wing's explanation as an article in a textbook, then these fights would have been examples, and very exciting examples at that. And these are all organic ways of explaining things. Hisoka would have no problem boasting to Machi about how he defeated Castro, and Machi's tactical expertise in battle is foreshadowed here as well, telling us a bit about the troop. Kurapika's scenes in which more Nen properties were explained beautifully wove into his character arc, and the fights were a linchpin of Heaven's Arena in the first place. So this arc introduces one of the most important aspects of the series in a big way, but a way that never seemed like it was too much too soon, before gradually adding complexity throughout the rest of the arc and the series. Throughout the entire story, we're constantly learning about different and new ways in which Nen can be applied. Vows, restrictions, how Nen and emotion are linked, and more are expanded upon in later arcs, and keep the audience engaged and wanting to learn more. But none of this engagement would be possible if Togashi didn't decide to withhold just the right amount of information during the initial explanation in Heaven's Arena. Think of all the biggest and most legendary moments in the series. Gon vs Hisoka, Kurapika vs Uvogin, the epic dodgeball game, Netero vs Meruem, Gon's destruction of Pito, Leorio's epic punch. All of these revolve around and are ingrained in Nen. And I know that this is stating the obvious, but when you remember that none of these moments would have occurred if Heaven's Arena didn't organically dovetail the biggest info dump in the series into a classic tournament arc, it really makes you appreciate it a little bit more. And not only does Heaven's Arena excel in introducing Nen as a concept and gradually constructing a new tone, but it achieves even more than that as a supporting arc. First of all, it represents the first time that Gon and Killua were ever alone for an extended period of time. Their relationship is the heartbeat of the majority of the series, and Heaven's Arena is the first time where the two are able to learn about one another at a deeper level. This sets the stage for a lot of the more complex dynamics between the two later on. The arc also evolves and strengthens Gon's desire to get stronger from the Hunter exam arc. And at the end of the Hisoka fight, this desire is not born from much of anything other than pure lust to get stronger for no other reason than to get stronger. In the past, he had justified his desire to gain power with the reasoning that it would help him find Jing, but as he sees Hisoka walking away, his lusts are characterized much more by a reckless abandon, which is a huge factor in the type of character Gon is. This moment foreshadows quite a bit about Gon's desire, determination, and inability to accept failure, which is extremely important for how this aspect of his personality evolves later on. All of these characteristics combine to make Heaven's Arena one of the most impactful and underrated arcs of the series. So much of what makes Hunter x Hunter amazing is set up thanks to this support story. It may not have the most interesting plot, the deepest themes, or the most complex characters, but that's not the type of arc that this is. And it may not have been the first domino of the series like the Hunter's exam was, but I personally believe that it was the domino that had the biggest chain effect. What I find most impressive here is not that the arc simply achieves all of this, but that it achieves this seamlessly while managing to be an entertaining and engaging tournament arc that maintains Togashi's trademark charming and quirky style. What I admire most about Heaven's Arena is how naturally it does its job. It's a transitional arc that disguises itself as a pure tournament arc, and succeeds with flying colors, and I find that really cool. Hell, most of what I've talked about here doesn't actually take up the majority of the screen time, with the rest centered on awesome fights. Heaven's Arena is deceivingly mechanical. I'd say it's the most functional arc in the series. It's a little story that Togashi needed to write to broaden the horizons of his world and story in various ways. And epic sprawling plots like York New or Chimera Ant need proper setup and transitions to maximize their impact, so they owe a lot to Heaven's Arena. I'd advise anyone with ambitions of writing an effective story to look closer at the machinations of Heaven's Arena when trying to broaden the horizons of a fictional work. So, what do you guys think? Is Heaven's Arena really as important as I say, or am I talking out of my ass? Did you like it, or were you not impressed by the whole thing? Which is the most underrated arc for you? Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Keep an eye out on the channel for more content coming out very soon, and stay tuned for the next Hunter x Hunter character analysis video, where we will be covering a man who is interesting in his own right, but who represents even more than his already pretty huge plot significance. Thanks again, and I'll see you guys later.